Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where today's most exciting solopreneurs share their startup stories. They also deliver tangible strategies that they would implement personally if starting their business over today. Each episode is a startup masterclass. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and I have Frances Simowitz with me today. Frances, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
So I've already missed her geographic location by practically as far away as you can miss it. I was guessing New York City, and she is currently in the southwest part of the U.S., right down in Arizona.
Yeah, I'm down in Arizona. I'm normally in New York, but I've decided to be a very young snowbird and fly south for the winter.
What a great move. And so just for the rest of our listeners, since you and I have had a chance to kind of chat offline here, introduce yourself as if you were meeting our audience at a networking event.
Yeah, so I'm Frances. I'm the CEO of WEVE Acceleration. We support international startups with U.S. market entry. We also work with a lot of governments and corporates from around the world as well to help them access innovation and opportunity in the U.S. market.
And this is only international businesses, or do you actually work with U.S.-based business as well?
No, we only work with international businesses. So everything in the world that's not the U.S. Like we've worked now with over 25 different nationalities from around the world. So our startups come from everywhere, except for the U.S. Also, all of our governments are international governments primarily, and also corporations. So when we work with a corporate, like we run learning expeditions for Google France and Google EMEA. And we've done, right now we're actually working with a European pharmaceutical company to help them open an innovation hub in the US. So everything is international.
So nobody wakes up one day and says, I'm going to open up an accelerator for international businesses wanting to enter the US market. I am curious what that origin story is.
So naturally, I studied music education and opera.
A perfect path to international business
totally
entry.
Makes sense, and business in general. Yeah, no, it was, I kind of had an interesting path to get here. So I majored in, as I said, music and opera. I really loved music and opera growing up, especially because I loved choir, and choir is like a community of people collaborating at once to create something beautiful. And as I, was studying in college, like really the path there is to have like a solo career. And I fell out of love with it because there's a lot of like ego and, the mentality of like, your success means my failure type of things. And I really wanted, and I missed the things that I actually originally fell in love with about music. And so I left that field and spent some time trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. So I was a nanny on the Upper West Side. And I had this moment where I was watching the kids on the playground, and, I would spend a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to do next. I had no idea. And I had this moment where I was like, oh, I can do anything. Like I'm a big kid now and I can play all the big kid stuff. Like I can go down the big kid slide, and like, the only thing limiting myself from like doing a new path is me. And so my ex-husband worked in startups and technology, and I saw how collaborative they were, the energy and the excitement towards what they were building. And I was like, I think I want that. And I had spent a lot of time reading about, marketing and different career paths. I was like, should I be an astrophysicist or go into marketing? Very different. I'm like, unfortunately, I don't like math. So physics was out. And
eliminate that choice.
Yeah, no. Although there's a lot of math as a CEO too.
Yeah,
so.
for sure.
And so I ended up finding a boot camp. So it was an educational boot camp that was actually built upon the same model of acceleration. It was actually founded by the managing directors of Techstars Boston, called Startup Institute. And I went through that program. So I went through an accelerator myself, and it absolutely changed my life. So it was 8 weeks. It was a combination of like practical knowledge that was taught by industry experts, which is very similar to accelerator curriculum, and really introduces you to a network. And so I was able to get a job in tech and startups after that. And that changed my life, got me really passionate about accelerators. I later went to actually work at Startup Institute and help run their accelerator, which then led me to Numa, which is now WEVE because I've bought it. But Numa was opening, they were a French accelerator, had been around for like 20 years. They were the first accelerator in France. And they were looking to open their New York office. And so I joined the founding team for the New York office. And I've been there for the last 5 years. And in July, I acquired the US subsidiary and we just rebranded to WEVE Acceleration.
So the connections, I'm obviously with the French, accelerator that your incubator that you were working with or for, I'm assuming that's kind of the international connection that kind of drew you to that space initially.
Yeah, I honestly, when I took the role at Numa to open their New York office, they had 8 locations around the world. And so that was kind of my first actual international business experience. And it was really exciting because it was an opportunity to build a program from scratch. Like I had already been working for an accelerator program that was already operating. And they had sort of a hypothesis when they opened the New York office. So like, we'd like to develop a program to support international companies. Because a lot of Numa's global portfolio, when they got to a certain stage and size of maturity and funding, many of them were looking at how do I access the next stage of growth? Yeah. Do I enter new markets? A lot of them, we had alumni that were already expanding to the US, but there wasn't a program that was really tailored and dedicated to their specific needs because it's a little bit different when you're coming from another country. You're at a different stage. You need different things, like adapting culturally is very different to the market. You have different regulatory and legal type challenges than a US-based startup would have. And so we developed a curriculum and a program that was very specifically tailored towards that type of company.
So what's the basic, I guess, path into WEVE? I mean, so if I have a company over in let's just say in the United Kingdom and we want to enter the US market and I'm reaching out to you, it's almost interesting, but the model behind like an incubator, you always think about like early stage startups. So these may be existing, companies that are rolling that they just want to enter the new market. Or are these truly startups that want to enter the US market?
They're more scale-ups than startups a lot of the time. So I would say most of our companies are around Series A or Series B already. So they already have anywhere between 30 to like, we've had companies that already have 400 employees. We've had companies join our accelerator that have already raised 20 million. So they're not true baby startups, right? Which is part of why our model is different. So most of our companies, we don't take equity. We're primarily fee-based for them when they, select to apply and go through the program. That's because when you're already raised a Series B, taking that, typical 3 to 7% of equity is so much more valuable and expensive at that stage. But they still need the knowledge, the network, and the access that an accelerator provides. Yep. So we have a very different model for those companies. And we take them through a selection process because one of the things that's, I think, challenging about entering a new market is really making sure that you're prepared. I've seen companies make mistakes and expand too soon before they're either financially ready or their team is stable enough for a founder to really focus on the market. And so a lot of what our selection process is doing is to help make sure that companies actually have a potential product market fit here, that they are actually ready for the US, and that like we'd be able to be equipped to support them based on like their specific needs and objectives. So that's basically how we work with those companies.
It almost sounds like the way you described it, it's almost like more of a market entry consultant than like an accelerator that, you're like, if you're taking somebody that's already rolling and they're saying, okay, we want to consider, doing this, which is different versus, just really the startup mentality that says, we're all, I don't care what vertical we're in, we're all starting up different levels, but it's aiming at, and it would be difficult in my mind, it'd be difficult to aim at the class, maybe you're having to group people by where they are in the process too.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
There's about 15 questions in there, by the way.
Yeah, no, so they're right, I know. So there are international like consultants for these types of startups, and we have a lot of like mentors that do that sort of work in our network. However, I would argue that we are still an accelerator because it's cohort based, curriculum based, and taught by actual like industry incumbents. So everyone joins together at the same time. We are industry agnostic, so we will have different industries and different countries in the same cohort. Like this current cohort, we have like a startup from Hungary, and we have one from the UK, and they're coming from all over the place, and they're all together at once. The curriculum is like, I think important aspect. Like if you're a consultant, it's like one person advising you as, a CEO or a founder on like the best path forward. Where for us, it's really more about like the network access. So
Yeah.
having access to a large number of network, to different perspectives, curriculum on like marketing in the US, sales in the US, how to hire in the US, is really where, kind of I think the accelerator model comes in. And I think accelerator models can actually be applied to a lot of different things that aren't just startups. I actually recently met, I got to speak at a class at like Yale that was like focused on innovation and acceleration. And I met this girl who's also named Frances, who's building an accelerator for artists and musicians. That as a way to sort of them to get funding for their projects, to help investors diversify the types of investments they make. And so that's not startups at all,
Yep.
but it's the same sort of accelerator model of access, network, capital, resources. But yes, it is a different sort of model than the traditional kind of old school. These are the early stage companies.
Yeah.
We are investing in them so that they grow. Where I oftentimes argue that model where it's like the early stage investment, they're really more VCs than the accelerator. It's a VC that's using an accelerator model to help expand the chances of success for their portfolio.
Exactly. Exactly. But it sounds like to me that
you have opinions.
well, no, and I think you're exactly right. And as you described it, I mean, you really have two completely different, markets within your model. I mean, you do have the equity based, angel VC want to be interested in, hopefully this is a unicorn versus, somebody you're saying, you're paying us a fee. We're going to help you through our network of resources and curriculum and, cohort and whatever, all the things together, the ecosystem that you built around this, I think is probably a great descriptor, but it's a real transition, isn't it, from working for Numa to buying and leading WEVE. I'm sorry.
WEVE, yeah.
Tell me what you've experienced like in the last 12 months going from employee to I'm the boss now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I thought it would feel more different. We've actually been able to operate, even when we were Numa New York, very independently of Numa Paris for a long time. Like, and over time they tried to also make us closer, and they had pivoted and stopped doing acceleration entirely, and they were doing an amazing job doing more like management trainings. Where in the US, it's a very crowded market for that. And so our accelerator programs are working really well. Our work with international governments has been really doing well. And so they said, why don't we find a good way to separate? And so this is clearly what you love. I got to build this, in the middle of the pandemic, even though I didn't own the business. I was up at night worrying about paying all of our employees. And, because we were a French company, wasn't able to get access to things like the PPP loan. And so I've had a lot of responsibility, and to France, we were a US company, so we couldn't get any of that support either. So I've had like the weight of the company on my shoulders for the last 5 years anyway. So it didn't really feel that different when I actually took on the company.
Yeah.
But there are moments where it feels exciting. Like we went to Portugal to Web Summit, and we hosted our first in-person cocktail because we were doing some like network and relationship building there. And we had our WEVE banners, and it, was like, wow, this is like really ours now to take on and kind of build in the direction that we want to go. And there's moments like that where I'm like, oh, we're not restricted into where we can build this. Like, I don't need to ask permission to, take this in the place that I have the vision to take it. And that's been really wonderful.
And with your model, is there a VC fund built into the model as well? Do you have your own VC fund, or are you working with private equity firm, or what?
So we refer our startups to other investors. Like we have a network of about 150, I think it's actually more now, investors that will like want access to our portfolio, come to our events, et cetera. It is, I think, me and my business partner's objective, like in the next couple of years, to raise a fund to be able to invest or to co-invest in either the Series A, Series Bs, or bridge rounds for the US markets, because it is a missed opportunity in a lot of ways. Like we've had exits in our portfolio of companies, and I don't always have participation in them.
So all that money go out the door.
I know. We love our companies and we do support them long term. But it would be nice to be able to do that and have that. We have warrants in a couple of the companies, but really, ultimately, I think having a fund would be a great way to continue to support their growth into the US, and it would also be, advantageous for us.
I want to tell our listeners to hit the pause button right here and rewind. And actually, if you're watching this on YouTube, so go back about a minute and a half when she first starts answering this question. When I ask her, you could see her look in the distance like, yes, that is that is soon to be in our plans. So you could just see the gears turning in the founder's mind here. So I love that. Yeah, that's what a poignant moment in the middle of our chat here. You just kind of had an out of body experience there for a second. And said,
like, yeah,
that's exactly where we need to head. So yeah, you're on it. So for sure. So I'm really curious about how working with international businesses versus international, like different countries' governments. What's it like? I mean, I can't imagine the bureaucracy that might, be involved working with governments versus businesses. But what does your model look like? I mean, what would the government of Italy want to do versus, say, a tire manufacturer in Italy that wants to come into this market?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually really like working with the governments. One of the things that I think is a difference between the US market and sort of the rest of the world, and especially Europe, is sort of the model of funding for companies. So most of the time, you'll see a lot of like early stage companies in Europe. They've never taken venture capital because they've been able to exist on funding and grants from the government. Like a lot of startups globally are publicly funded, where in the US, no startups are really publicly funded, and it's all private capital, which has its benefits. The valuations are really big here. This is an amazing market, all of that. And the startups want access to that from Europe, but it is just like a very, very different, way of approaching it. And so working with the governments is actually great, the international governments, because they are very aligned with the objectives of helping their companies from their country export, because they know that brings back, if they have a unicorn in the US that brings back returns to the investors and their employees and talent there, that it actually can help fuel economic growth for countries around the world. And so there is definitely bureaucracy. So when we work with the governments, there's definitely a lot more, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. We answer like a lot of times, there's these large public tenders that we have to answer and compete for bids for. I was working on one today and it's like 20 pages long with all these details and our use cases. And then when it comes to reporting, like there's a lot more details that they need to justify the public funding and making sure that the program is a success. But it's a great opportunity for us to customize the programs. I think it's great for the startups because they then don't have to fund the expansion themselves. They're able to then get that support and that financing from the government to continue to fuel their growth, which is, I think, a great opportunity. So that's really great. And then when we work with corporates, I think it's similar. There's different kind of initiatives and objectives that they have, and the US is a very hot market still. It's like there's so much opportunity. It's such a big market. It's very crowded. There's everything here. And so that like American dream of like accessing the innovation and opportunity here, I think whether you're a corporate, government, or startup, is still paramount.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I think, I've talked to people from 30 different countries, in the startup space, and it is really interesting when they talk about a lot of times of the US market versus, the market they may exist in right now. There's just always like, it would be great if we could access that, if we could just kind of add that to our, to our portfolio of markets. And I mean, I've actually interviewed people that like there was a guest I had, I'm guessing about a year ago, that is in a Norway, kind of incubator here in the States, that are just trying to get Norwegian, companies to come and access the talent pool, access, resources and markets, here. And that's their whole job, is just, kind of making that bridge connection. So it is really interesting to kind of hear your story. And if you had to kind of prognosticate a little bit, what is WEVE going to look like in 24 months or 60 months from now? Or, what is your dream of of where you're headed as a company, as an organization?
Yeah. I mean, right now we're at a moment where, we're still growing. And now that we have our ability to really focus in on what we do well, which is really great. I mean, I think right now my big focus is to really just like get our revenue lines and our team, like we're growing, we're hiring right now, like really solid. Because right now we have so much opportunity and
Mm-hmm.
like deals at the moment. And we don't have enough team. So like
Mm.
really it's like we're having like growing problems, which is good problems to have. But really like where we want to be going with this is, as I mentioned, the venture capital fund is a really important piece of this so that we continue to grow. But like our main focus is being sort of the main support system and connector for all international to the US.
Mm.
We're looking also expanding further and deeper into the West Coast, which we've started to do as
Mm-hmm.
well, because we're very located in New York,
Right.
but US is a big country. And so a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times when startups come, it's not just about New York, or even sometimes not just about the West Coast either.
Yep.
Depending on where, you're coming from or your industry, Texas might be better if you're doing oil
Austin
and
is
gas.
such
Like,
a
yeah,
magnet right now. Yeah.
yeah, or like, health tech and pharmaceutical is wonderful in Boston. And so
Mm-hmm.
really kind of growing also our access for these startups into different areas of the country is also a big priority.
Yeah, I can certainly see that, and it's interesting. I mean, even like I said, even guests that I would interview, from other countries that talk about entering the U.S. market, you would think, okay, we're landing in New York, we're landing in Silicon Valley, maybe Austin, and they're like, no, actually, I'm going to Des Moines, Iowa. We're looking at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. That the whole idea of
Yeah.
where their customers are, and it's interesting to hear that. But I do want to transition a little bit right now. This is such an important part of Rising Tides interview process, is really kind of letting founders, letting startup CEOs really teach kind of the next gen behind them. And I talked a little bit about this offline. I'm curious to hear what your answer is going to be, but just give us a couple of things that are just come to mind that you say, you know what, I wish this would have been different. I wish I could have done this differently, type thing. And I think it would really benefit, somebody that is, maybe in your place 18 months ago or 12 months ago or whatever. Just two, golden nuggets of things that I think would be really helpful, regardless of the industry or vertical.
Yeah. Gosh, I think entrepreneurship is such a mindset challenge all of the time. Like it's owning your own business can feel really glamorous. People want to start
Mm.
companies because it seems like the glamorous thing to do. But it's really hard in a lot of ways. And I think I talk a lot about fear and sort of wrestling and grappling with your fear and what you do with it. Like there was, for example, and I've always said the thing that someone else said this, but the the thing that you should be most fear of is or afraid of is fear itself,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so limiting. And there are times where making a decision feels really hard because I'm scared or scared of like the unknown, and it's like constantly fighting and battling those instincts of fear. Because usually, if you're afraid of something, that's often the thing that you should do.
Mm.
So, for example, when it came time to like start having the conversations about where the company was going, because the education stuff that Numa Paris was doing really well with, wasn't really working well in the U.S. It was hard for my team because a lot of what they were doing on the accelerator side, they're like, if the company is supposed to be going towards education, like, shouldn't we be doing this? But
Mm.
that's also what was working successfully. And I was afraid. I was afraid of having the hard conversations with Numa Paris at the time to be like, this isn't working. And I probably delayed that conversation by like 6 months because of fear.
Mm.
Because in my mind, like I have some like, autoimmune health conditions, and I was worried like if I lose my job, like how am I going to pay for my health insurance?
Mm.
And like, you have those like real things, and
Yep.
you're, like it's hard. Like you need almost being able to be an entrepreneur is almost a privileged position because,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes you do actually need a safety net.
Yep.
Is this otherwise, what are you going to
It's
do?
like golden
Um,
handcuffs.
yeah, exactly. And so I was worried that if I had these conversations or pushed back too hard, that, what if they replaced me as the
Mm.
MD and CEO of the office, which could happen if they were really passionate about that direction. And so like I knew that I was behaving with fear. I knew I was like, I'm not doing the thing that I want to be doing, and I'm afraid, and I know I'm afraid. So I like found an alternative route, which was for me actually at the time I didn't want another job, but I started applying for other jobs because I felt like if I had something that was in my back pocket and I
Mm.
was already interviewing and they fired me, then it would be fine.
Doesn't
Even
matter.
though that was not really what I wanted to do. I didn't really want another job, which then gave me the kind of confidence to then have
Yeah.
that conversation with them and say, look, like if this is where we're going, I don't know that it makes sense to have the New York office. Like,
Mm.
if you were a startup, we're not ready for the US. Like, I think you guys are doing amazing work. I think down the line, you're ready for the US,
Mm.
and can expand there. But like, I think it's not going to work for what we're doing. And it was received so much better because like things always work out usually better than you expect in your head when you're
Yeah.
scared, like the
Yeah.
worst case scenario.
Mm.
And they were so open to it and so supportive and were just excited about us taking this next journey, and were like amazing advocates for us. And so, it's I think the number one thing that I would say is like conquering your fear and navigating through fear and moving the next step forward, even though you're scared. You're never not going to be scared,
Mm.
ever. It's just taking that next step. And so I would say it's a constant battle, but like I should have done that way sooner. If I, hadn't been so scared or recognized I was
That
scared
one's
sooner.
huge. That one is huge. And I mean, you can stop at one if that's the one that comes to mind, because it's such a huge, kind of all encompassing, I mean, I literally wrote embrace and chase, fear,
Mm-hmm.
that not only just acknowledge that it's there, but literally, almost run into it versus running away from it, because
Yeah.
I love what you said, the idea that, it's probably the thing you should do. The thing you're most
Yeah.
scared of is probably the thing you should do.
And it applies to so many things. Like if you're unhappy at your job, but you're scared of applying for new jobs and of the change, so that's probably what you should do. Like a lot of times, your fear is telling you something.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Well, we've chatted about so many different things, and I mean, there are so many other things I could ask you about, but I do want to respect your time as well. I mean, you've got a company to run, and I want to respect that. But anything that we haven't touched on that you just want to close this out with today, and then just remind our audience where the best place to find you online is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I'm always happy to connect with anyone. I think that's an important aspect of it, like running a community and network. It's a resource, and so I'm happy to connect with anybody that is listening that would like to chat about anything, because I've had so much support and help in my career from
Mm.
people that I'm always happy to help others. I think also too, like that's actually so the things that I loved about music previously, which was that collaboration
Hmm.
and building something beautiful together, I now have with what I do, running an accelerator. So
For
it's
sure.
so connection, collaboration, I think is a really important thing. So happy to help. And best way to reach me, you can find me on LinkedIn, and Frances Simowitz, or you can email me at frances@weaveacceleration.com.
Well, Frances, thank you so much for just taking time to share with us today, and it's going to be really fun to kind of watch the growth trajectory and the upward right hockey stick growth of WEVE Acceleration. And once again, just thanks for taking time and just really playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Frances, have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Another episode in the books. We hope you heard some great takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on iTunes and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening to Rising Tide.